The question that we have been addressing in the last and this discussion is the nature of European construction of history, of philosophy, mathematics, and sciences, and the validity of this history when tested against the historical evidence. So just to summarize the last discussion, because a couple of people, I suppose, were not there, and it has been a couple of weeks, uh, Europe has an origin story. That is, all of the European sciences and all of the modern sciences have Greek origin. So this is one of the primary claims on which modern European civilization or civilizations stand, that all major systems of philosophy, logic, geometry, mathematics have their origin in Greek or Hellenistic period, therefore in Europe. Modern era is marked with European hegemony in knowledge, production, not only in technological fields, but also in academia and humanities. So this makes any challenge to such a claim, the story of Greek origins of philosophy and mathematics, much more harder. These claims have more or less become a fact of nature. Like water is wet, so is logic Aristotelian, or philosophy Socratic, or geometry Euclidean. In the last discussion, we focused primarily on the Eurocentric tendencies situating the origins of philosophy in Greece. We found how Greek icons such as Herodotus, Plato, Aristotle, Socrates accepted major influence of Egyptian mathematics, philosophy, and socio-political institutions on their thought and Greek society. So much so that Plato's Republic was mocked as a mere copy of Egyptian hierarchical society. We also discussed why during the age of European Enlightenment, 17th and 18th century, and subsequent period of colonization of global South, Egypt was sidelined and eventually whitewashed in the favor of Greece as the country from which these sciences originated. So there were three major reasons which we distilled. The first one was European Christian revival of the Crusader spirit. The second was the rise of concept of progress and the portrayal of Europe as the progressive continent, opposed to Egypt or Africa and other non-European civilizations as stagnant. And the third one was growth of racism or white supremacism. From philosophical foundations of racism, which are present in Hume, Kant, and so on, Hegel, and so on, scientific Darwinian racism. In today's discussion, we will be looking at European claims that systems of logic, geometry, and mathematics originated in Greece. So let's look at logic first. Now, it is an article of faith in the educated circles in academia that logic began with Aristotle. As we discussed last time, I mentioned that Tom and I were discussing, and friends were discussing about logic, dialectical logic, and we mentioned what other logics there are. And that one of the things came up is that logic fundamentally is Aristotelian logic, and then you have dialectical logic and so on. So this is pretty much like a foundational belief that logic is Aristotelian in its nature, foundationally. It is the Aristotelian logic that creates the foundational logic and every other variant that originated from this subsequently. In this, it is also believed that two valued truth functional nature of Aristotelian logic is universal and deductive. So deduction or deductive logical arguments are infallible and certain. The example of this deductive logical binary logical system would be, let's say X could be a proposition that this pot is red, and negation of X would be a proposition that this pot is not red. Now these two X and negation of X form a contradictory pair. Based on such contradictory pairs, we can formulate various truth functional deductive arguments whose truth values you can quantify or quantitatively determine. Now this is a very powerful system on the basis of which we have the modern computational logic as well. So the modern computational logic works on binary logical systems, which are 0 and 1, and then the operations of these 0 and 1s. So such binary systems of logic, which are attributed to Aristotle, are not merely used in formal or philosophical logic or in technology, but various political ideological systems have taken inspiration from this particular system of binary logic. For example, Hegelianism, Marxism, fascism, and feminism are some of the primary examples. All of them more or less work within the framework of oppositional, contradictory element, fundamental element. So the Aristotelian logic has also has widespread ideological appeal. The question is that what are the known historical facts? How reliably can we attribute this binary logic system and the related syllogisms to Aristotle of 4th century BC? Now, the only historical fact that we know, or the only historical facts that we know, is that Europeans copied the manuscripts which are ascribed to Aristotle from Arabs, Persians, Central Asian Muslims, especially after Europeans got their hands on the libraries of Cordoba, before the First Crusade in 12th century AD. There is no historical proof of the use of syllogisms or binary logic, formal logic, among the Europeans before 12th century AD. So there is no historical manuscript that dates back to the time of historical Aristotle of 4th century BC. What we have are the 12th century Toledo translations of Arabic works of philosophy and logic done and sponsored by the European Church, which were sort of backdated and attributed to historical Aristotle of 4th century BC. You can see there is a gap. There's a historical gap of about 16 centuries or 15 centuries. Contrary to this alleged Aristotelian binary logic system, which is supposed to be the original logical system of formal logic, various other systems of logics were developed and were used for inference in, for example, India, prior to even the historical Aristotle, that is, prior to 4th century BC. 4th century BC. Indian system of logic were neither, various Indian systems of logics were neither true-valued nor truth-functional. So do people understand what is the meaning of truth-functional? Functional basically means a statement has a truth value which can be measured. So a statement is true or a statement is false, right? Or a mix of these particular statements, you can find out the truth value, that is whether the statement or the complex or combined or composite statement is true or false. So this is called basically truth functional, and you can create various sorts of complex arguments based on this. So the first example of this Indian system of logic is the Buddhist system of logic, which was described in Digh Nikaya. Digh basically means long. So these are Nikayas, discourses, long discourses of Buddha, and which were written, the dates are varying from 9th century to 5th century BC. So in these Digh Nikaya, there is a particular sutta, a particular group of aphorisms, which is called Brahmajala Sutta. Brahmajala Sutta, in Brahmajala Sutra, Buddha, or whoever is speaking on behalf of, writing on behalf of Buddha, writes 4 possibilities regarding the nature of the world. The first possibility is that the world is finite. This is one case. And second case is the world is not finite. This is another case. Third one is the world is both finite and infinite. Fourth is the world is neither finite nor infinite. These are the 4. This particular example can be extended to 4-natured sort of system of logic, or sort of four valued system of logic. These 4 cases were systematically developed by later Buddhist logicians, such as Nagarjuna, who gave the idea of emptiness doctrine in Shunyata. And based on this Shunyata doctrine, he developed a particular cosmological outlook. And similarly, another Buddhist logician, Dinanga, developed a theory of various logical quantifiers. Logical quantifiers are quantifiers or symbols or operations which are used in formal logic. Similarly, like Buddhists, Indian Jains, they were followers of Mahavira. Mahavira was an ascetic and contemporary of Buddha. He developed another system of logic, which was called Syadavada. Syadavada is perhapsism. So you see that instead of the certainty of a binary system, you have much more flexible, a fuzzy logical system. Fuzzy logical system, I'm saying it in a precise, in a for a particular reason, because fuzzy logic is a mathematical system of logic which was developed by Egyptian mathematician around in 20th century, much later. So we see a much more complex system of logic. And this particular Syadavada, that is Perhapsism, had seven value. It was a 7-valued system, much more complex system. So the European claims of supremacy and universality of logical deductive truths is further challenged if we follow this line of historical inquiry. In the traditional Indian philosophical system, the logical truths are ranked below empirical truths. So empirical truths are much more higher, ranked much more higher in their veracity, in their truthfulness compared to logical truths. So the empirical manifest, that is in Sanskrit or Pali, it will be called prataksha. Prataksha is regarded as the first pramana proof. So manifest or the direct empirical proof is the primary proof. Any other inferential proof or deductive proof is secondary proof. So what we see here is that the Indians did develop much before the historical Aristotle, a much more complex system of formal logic. And not only the system of formal logic, but a complex system of formal logic, but something which does not accept the claim of universality of logical statements as the primary statements, but empirical statements or empirical truths as much more fundamental. So these particular examples do challenge the first claim, the first European claim of the Europeans as Aristotelian logic being the primary, the fundamental logical system, or the first fundamental logical system. Moreover, there is no reliable historical proof or credible chain of narration which can be used to assign 12th century Toledo translations of Arabic works to the historical Aristotle of 4th century BC. There is a gap of 15 centuries. So this is a brief sort of summary of how there are historical gaps in the narrative, in the European narrative. Now we can move on to similar claims about mathematics. So regarding mathematics, I'm taking example of Elizabeth Green. She's an author who wrote popular books and articles on pedagogy, history of science, and mathematics. She wrote an article titled "Goodbye, Pythagoras." So Pythagoras is supposed to be a Greek mathematician genius, and the title has a question mark, "Goodbye, Pythagoras." So she's questioning whether we are saying goodbye to Pythagoras. The article addresses the threat to Greek origins of mathematics story, specifically due to the increase in the research of ethnomathematics. Notice this particular word, ethnomathematics. The non-European mathematics are not mathematics proper, but ethnomathematics, quite similar to ethnic dresses or ethnic cuisine, and so on. So in this particular article, Elizabeth Green comes up with the answer. She says, and I'm quoting her, but even the most ardent professors of ethnomathematics say that they are not trying to replace the great Greeks and other European thinkers who have shaped modern mathematics. Instead, they say that they are blending European ideas with African, Asian, Native American, and other mathematical innovations, teaching both European and non-European practices. Therefore, like philosophy and logic, mathematics too originated with Greek, passed on to the Arabs, Persians, Indians, Central Asians, who were mere bookkeepers. And later, this particular knowledge of the Greeks was transmitted back to the Europeans, who further developed this particular knowledge to its present state. If you believe the European story, which most of us do believe. To investigate this particular Greek-European origin of mathematics story, let's consider two major Greek mathematicians, Pythagoras and Euclid. So I have to show you a couple of slides for this. So can people see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, great. So before we start the story about Pythagoras and Euclid, let's look at this chap, Dhanvantari. Dhanvantari basically, in various Brahmin tracts such as Vishnu Purana, is attributed as the first person who systematized medicine. According to Vishnu Purana and other later Brahmin texts, Dhanvantari was the person who gave the world the oldest system of medicine, Ayurveda. And he listed and identified correctly all of the medicinal properties of various substances, plants, and so on and so forth. Who was Dhanvantari? Dhanvantari, as Vishnu Purana says, he was a demigod who rose with the nectar of immortality. You can see the kind of a picture, the pot, and this pot, the gold pot or the golden pot, contains nectar of immortality in his hands during the churning of holy oceans of milk. So this event, holy churning of the holy oceans of milk, happened about 4 million years ago. Now, if I ask you to believe this particular story, if I ask you to believe the historicity of this particular story of Dhanvantari, you will demand historical evidence. There are the 4 million year old artifacts, papyri, inscriptions, coin, and other verifiable sources, right, which can ascertain the existence of historical Dhanvantari and the claims that he was the first person to systematize medicine and give the world the old system of medicine, and so on and so forth. And you will be right in demanding so. Similarly, now let's come to Pythagoras, who is not any less illustrious than Dhanvantari, as we shall see. Pythagoras allegedly was born in 570 BC. He lived and studied in Egypt for 21 years. He was claimed to be a brilliant mathematician who believed in the rational numbers, holding the key to the mystery of the universe. All good. He's reputed to have been now comes the more sort of interesting part. Pythagoras is reputed to have been the son of Apollo, the Greek god. Pythagoras was endowed with supernatural brightness and a golden thigh. And Apollo's own physician came to him on a golden arrow whenever Pythagoras got sick. I don't know what is the meaning of golden thigh and the golden arrow bit, but the mythological stories are not any less any less impressive compared to Dhanvantari. As we question the validity of existence of historical Dhanvantari, the famed Brahmin medicine god, or the person who systematized medicine, we should also question the existence of historical Pythagoras and demand historical evidence with similar rigor. The way to counter such demands for historical evidence is to claim that there indeed was a historical figure called Pythagoras, or for that matter, Dhanvantari, and mythological stories accumulated around these particular characters. Now, these arguments might satisfy people who have emotional religious belief in these mythological stories, but they cannot be considered as historical evidence. So where is the historical evidence of this brilliant Greek mathematician, Pythagoras, son of Apollo, right? We shall look into that in a few minutes. But before that, we should inquire what are the achievements of Pythagoras, why he was claimed to be such a brilliant mathematician. So this is Pythagoras as depicted. You can see that he's similarly, there are pictures as well as statues of Pythagoras like Dhanvantari. So Pythagoras, there are in mathematical systems, there are triplets or triples of numbers, which are now called Pythagorean triples. So for example, if we take this triple, 3, 4, 5, and we square each number, 3 squared gives us 9, 4 squared gives us 16, 5 squared gives us 25. And if we add 9 plus 16, it gives us 25. Therefore, 3 squared plus 4 squared can be written as 5 squared. So this is the property of all mathematical systems, mathematical number systems, natural number systems, and there are infinitely many number triples which can be found following this particular property. So another example is 5, 12, 13. If you do 5 squared, 12 squared, 13, this will be equal to 13 squared. Similarly, 8 15s, 8, 15, 17. If you do 8 square, 15 square, add them up, you'll get 17 square. So infinitely many of these triples. These triples are attributed to Pythagoras, that he discovered these particular triples. What else Pythagoras did? So there is a very famous theorem, which most of the people study in GCSE or before GCSE, high school and so on and so forth. So this theorem is named after Pythagoras, Pythagorean theorem or Pythagoras' theorem. And what is this theorem? Is if you take a right angle triangle, and you create squares on each of its sides, then you will get this particular property. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. That is, square created on two sides equals area of the square created on the third side. Now, this is a brilliant theorem. So these two particular achievements have been attributed to Pythagoras. Remember that Pythagoras is supposed to be born in 570 BC. Let's see if this Pythagorean triples or Pythagorean theorem existed ever before, or Pythagoras was the first person to discover that. So here is a tablet, Mesopotamian Babylonian tablet from Columbia University called, and it has the Babylonian numerals, cuneiform, which lists Pythagorean triples. And this tablet is dated 1900 to 1600 BC. Right? Remember, Pythagoras supposedly existed in 570 BC. So this is Pythagorean triples. They are still called Pythagorean triples. Similarly, you have another particular example in which you can see a very sophisticated value of square root of 2 being ascribed here. Similarly coming from Babylonian period, Mesopotamian Babylonian period. This is a very, very good approximation of this particular number, very complex sort of operation. Again, this is dated back to 1900 BC. Now, coming from Mesopotamia, or West Asia, let's come to East Asia. So this is a Chinese example. This is a pictorial proof of so-called Pythagorean theorem. And this is from a particular tract, which is called Chao Pi Suan Cheng. And it was from Zhao or Zhao dynasty of Eastern China. And it dates back to 1100 to 600 BC. So all of these examples, and then there are Indian examples and so on. So all of these examples clearly indicate that this particular idea, this particular idea of this right angle triangle theorem was present. Not only this idea was present, people were using this particular theorem in real life. That is, Mesopotamians were using it in creating various dams, dams near the rivers to prevent the floodings. And similarly, Chinese were using this particular thing. So the obvious question here is that if the Chinese and Mesopotamians specifically developed Pythagorean, this particular theorem, right angle triangle theorem, almost 1300 years back compared to Pythagoras, then why is this theorem not called Mesopotamian theorem or Babylonian theorem? Why Pythagorean theorem? Right? So the answer to this particular question is given by the European historians, such as that Pythagoras, even though this particular theorem was well known to other cultures, they were using this particular theorem, and these particular triples of numbers, Pythagoras developed a unique proof to this particular theorem, And what was unique about this proof? This proof was axiomatic proof, as opposed to empirical proofs. So you can see this this Chinese proof, which is an empirical proof. That is, you measure the lengths of the sides. You are measuring the length, and then you are adding, or you are then calculating the area of the triangles and so on. So instead of measurement, what Pythagoras is supposed to, or has supposed to have done, is that he presented the axiomatic proof using mere logic. Now, okay, I mean, this particular thing should not satisfy us, because if Mesopotamians did discover and were using this particular theorem, it should be really named after them. But for a moment, let's accept this argumentation, this line of argument presented by the European historians, and then ask, where is this proof, this axiomatic proof by Pythagoras? Now, to answer this particular question, Toledo translators of Toledo is 12th century Italy, um, European Christian translators of the Arabic works on mathematics introduced a new character. So this new character is Euclid, who was later declared as the father of geometry. Now we have a father of geometry as well. Yeah. So Euclid, according to them, wrote a very influential book on geometry called Elements. Now you can also nowadays find copies of Elements translated in English, and it is supposed to be a classic of geometry. Pythagoras and this axiomatic logical proof of the theorem is present in this book written by Euclid. So we have been told. Now let's check this book, Elements, allegedly written by Euclid. Did Euclid really write Elements? So the obvious question to resolve the authorship of Elements is to look for the copies, manuscripts of Elements, which mention Euclid as its author. I mean, similarly, if we ask a question, who wrote Capital? The answer is Marx, obviously. How can we ascertain it? There are plenty of copies, old copies, in the manuscripts, which mention Marx as the author of Capital, and we can verify that. So the question is, are there any copies of Elements which mention Euclid as the author of Elements? In the case of Element, the answer to this simple question is no. There are not a single copy of or manuscript of Elements which mentions Euclid as the author of that book. In fact, all of the editions of Elements mention that they are from the lectures of Theon. We will see who this Theon is. This has been admitted by various European scholars and classicists, such as Thomas Heath, an influential classicist and translator of Elements. Thomas Heath wrote, all our Greek texts of the Elements up to a century ago report in their titles to be either from the edition of Theon or from the lectures of Theon. This is, I'm quoting Thomas Heath. Not only this, Thomas Heath further admits that Euclid's name does not even appear in the commentaries on Elements, which commonly speak of the writer of Elements instead of using Euclid's name. So Elements originated from the lectures of Theon, and there is no mention of Euclid as its author, neither in the manuscripts nor in the commentaries. So why do we ascribe Euclid as the author of this particular influential book of geometry and make him the father of geometry? The answer to that is very convoluted. It's just in some ways very, very incredible. And the answer given is there is a single manuscript of Elements. So there are multiple manuscripts existent, but there is a single manuscript of Elements found in Vatican that has been valued solely for a curious property. The property is that, unlike other scripts, this does not mention a single thing saying that this Element book has been derived from the lectures of Theon. So this manuscript has been declared as official by the European scholars, as the official manuscript of Elements. Remember, even in this manuscript, there is no mention of Euclid as its author, but it is enough for the European Church and the European scholars to declare Euclid to be the author in the absence of Theon's name. So similarly, the secular modern European scholarship follows this particular pattern. We can see Theon, as I mentioned, Theon was an Egyptian, African mathematician, astronomer, and his daughter Hypatia was also a mathematician, scholar who was later on killed by European Nicenian Christians. And I mean, the historical depiction of her killing is gruesome, torn to pieces, etc., etc. But in the presence of overwhelming presence of manuscripts, multiple manuscripts, which mention Theon, the elements coming from the lectures of Theon, it is logical to accept Theon as the author, or Hypatia or the students of Theon as the compiler of elements. But European scholarship obviously disagrees. And here is the cherry on the top. Even in this element, there is no Pythagorean axiomatic proof of right angle triangle theorem. So we talked about the Pythagoras providing the axiomatic proof, the unique proof, but in this element, there is no particular axiomatic proof existing. People like Bertrand Russell tried in 20th century to reconstruct this particular proof from elements, but they failed. So there is no particular proof, but still we believe, and this has been taught in schools all over the world, that this right angle triangle theorem and these triplets of numbers have been produced, have been discovered, have been proved by Pythagoras. There was a guy called Pythagoras who existed, who was son of Apollo, and so on and so forth. Now, these myths were constructed and bolstered and propagated by European church and states, which primarily saw Muslims and their knowledge systems as existential threat. Now, if we think that this fabrication of history of mathematics philosophy stopped in 12th century or 17th, 18th century, I mean, we will be grossly incorrect. We saw in the previous discussion that there were multiple of intellectuals, European intellectuals, who justified this, this sort of fabricated history or lack of evidence of history. So you have another classicist who writes in History of Mathematics. The history of mathematics cannot, his name is W.W. Rousbaugh. This book, History of Mathematics, is still considered as the classic of history of mathematics. The history, he writes, the history of mathematics cannot be certain, cannot with certainty be traced back to any school or period before that of Greeks. So all early races knew something of numeration, that is, they could count. And though the majority were also acquainted with the elements of land surveying, yet the rules which they possessed were neither deduced from nor did they form any part of any science. This is the answer of European or Europeanized scholarship. Greek icons like Herodotus, Isocrates, Plato, Aristotle, admitting that Greeks aped all the practices and institutions of Black Egyptians, Africans, and also learned geometry, mathematics, logic, philosophy, even letters and letters from them, from the Egyptians. The European history of philosophy, mathematics, further exposes itself as a religious, racial, and ideological fabrication by dismissing the contributions of Arabs, Central Asians, Persians, Indians. And the grounds of these dismissal, again, they will go back to the Martin Bernal's assessment. These grounds of dismissals are three. The first one is the version of doctrine of Christian discovery. So using the papal bull orders of the Pope, the first European Christian to cite a piece of land becomes its discoverer. Similarly, the first European Christian to cite a system of knowledge becomes its discoverer. Secondly, the second reason of dismissal of such particular thing, such particular contributions of Arabs, Central Asians, Indians, and so on, is that the Arabs, Muslims tend to romanticize. They have a tendency to towards romance. And these are the words from classicists that I am quoting. And the third one is that the version of Indians, Chinese, and they thought being primarily philosophical and otherworldly. These Indians and Chinese were not concerned with the practical, empirical matters of this world. They were trying to get out of this world. So they created metaphysical systems. Now, through the mix of basically what we can say is that through the mix of outright fabrications, dismissal of historical evidence, and countless repetitions, the story of Greek European origins of knowledge was established as the standard history. And if we want to progress, that is, I mean, we accept that particular word as a positive word. If we want to move ahead, then we need to challenge and we need to verify the veracity, the truthfulness of this particular story of Greek origins of knowledge or European origins of knowledge. That's it. Thank you. Thanks. That's it. That I'm sharing. Tom, can you guys see what I'm saying? Okay.
Yes,
so this
yes.
is basically, this is Hypatia. This is Hypatia according to Encyclopedia Britannica. African Egyptian mathematician, astronomer. You can see that the features look very similar to Europeans, but this is the present Encyclopedia Britannica explains this is Hypatia. Okay, so yeah, that's it.
Stuff from it. I believe there's like, if anybody knows about the decolonizing movement that's taking place across universities in this country in particular, by students, NUS, by lecturers, the UCU. You know, does anybody has anybody got experience in this?
I don't agree with the whatever decolonial project or whatever they are calling it, because all they are doing is they are using the European standards or European framework to assess whatever they are assessing, and not only to that, but to create and construct an alternative. It's like using, maybe it is valid, but I see the severe limitations to that.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Saif, have you got any thoughts about the link between emerging counting systems and numbers and the emergence of economic modes? For example, in Egypt and in Mesopotamia, counting systems emerged, numbers emerged to track commerce and ownership of property and trade. So this again suggests that mathematics as a practical activity to measure economic activity began very early on, pre-Europe, in Mesopotamia, Egypt, and indeed in China, which links up with your thesis of about your arguments. But have you got any particular thoughts about the emergence of counting systems in numeracy as a form of accounting and economics?
Yeah, I mean, that's an extremely good point. And here we can see that various, I would say, anti-colonial mathematicians or anti-colonial historians of mathematics are emphasizing this particular point, that not only the emergence of numeration, but also systems of mathematics emerged in various parts of the world to deal with real problems. And as we saw, one of the tablets, the Babylonian tablet, it writes a particular value of square root of 2. And the value is correct up, I think, 6 to 7 decimal places, which is written in the tablet was written in 1900 BC. So much more complex, very, very complex operation. And this was to basically use this example in land surveys. So yes, you're absolutely right that there is a real connection between mathematics and whatever challenges humanity and various civilizations faced in their real lives. The similar sort of thing was happening with the Indian mathematical system. So, and the Indian calendars, which were developed keep track of the monsoon and famines and other seasonal changes. And that was one of the reasons why you can see that Arabs also insisted on or valued developing astronomy quite highly. They valued developing astronomy quite highly because Arabs were travelers or the traders who traveled long distances. And the astral navigation was the only way of navigating correctly. Otherwise, you would be lost over long distances. And we see the again, we will see that there were significant progresses made in Arab societies or Central Asian or Persian society in astronomy as well as mathematics. There is definitely a very, very tight link between the two real life challenges of human societies as well as development.
I recall that the Egyptians used geometry to predict the flow of the Nile.
That's what he said.
In relation to harvesting and planting seeds. Yeah.
That's what he just said.
Yeah.
Now, ask him when the Babylonian proof came to light in the West.
Can I also ask another factual question about the Babylonian proof,
Tablet.
the tablet you illustrated? Yeah. When did that actually come to light? Do you know?
1940.
1940.
It was archaeologically, it was found much before the 1940, 1890s. It was found, but cuneiform was first read. People were able to read for the first time in 1940s. So before that, the script was not. We were not able to decipher that particular script. And now there are, there are scholars who will teach you. You can go on YouTube and you can learn how to write cuneiform.
Do the Chinese have a continuous mathematical?
Safe. You know these. You know the Europe. They were saying that that these people are savages. That they're basically, in Africa in particular, and in South America, that these people are savages. Not just South America, but North America, the Americas. And so they couldn't. These people are savages, and that that they're childlike and everything. But they were advanced. Like, look at was it the Incas? The Incas were advanced civilizations.
There is a little book by. If people want to address it, it's fine. And I don't want.
Yeah. I've almost forgotten the question, actually. The question is, how come that the Eastern civilization, or the Indian, what you are talking about, and that you are claiming that mathematics was actually Eastern invention, and how come that we have then fallen into this trap of superstitions, when we were supposed to be the most logical, scientific thinking people, and yet we are the most you get my question.
If people want to address this question, it's fine. I have my opinions. So the first thing I would say is that I'm not asserting that mathematics or philosophy or logic have Eastern origin. I'm not peddling some sort of a ethnocentric idea here. What I'm saying is that ethnocentric idea or the ethnocentric history of mathematics, philosophy, logic, and so on, which is wrapped up in some sort of secular argument as a standard history. It's fake, it's bogus. This is my primary argument. Now, the second thing that you said is that we were the most logical and so on. So I don't think we were most logical, or anyone, whoever we is, right, were logical. Human beings are human beings. So there are people who are talking about, if you read Pitaka, that is the collection of Buddhist scriptures, you will find about 60-70% of the Buddhist scriptures are filled with the talks about how to avoid, how to protect yourself from ghosts. Literally, I mean, 60-70% is not even a joke. It's just repeatedly they are talking about how to protect yourself from ghosts. They're giving remedies and so on and so forth, all sorts of things, right? And how the ghost can affect you and so on. This is coming from Buddhists who are supposed to be, Buddhists or Indians and so on. They always argue that Buddhism was much more, even now, the European or Western Buddhists say that unlike the barbaric, murderous Islam or Abrahamic religions, Buddhism was much more peaceful, much more rational, much more logical. It's just all wishy-washy nonsense, hand waving. Reality is much more nuanced, much more complex. And this is what I mean, both of the talks, which last one as well as this one, is that we have to look for the historical evidence instead of believing the received sort of knowledge, received cultural knowledge. If we want to grasp, if we want to further our grasp on the truth. So I don't think this was the case, and this is still not the case. I mean, there are schools, there are thought systems, there are people who are much more rational. There are other people who are not rational, which is fine.
Saif, it's a wonderful talk you have given, and one would imagine that we were the leaders in scientific thought, and yet Indian society, we find that we are actually the most backward in the scientific thought, with the goings on in India. I just want to, thank you for your talk. I just want to say that.
Can I pick up Lex's point about this? I mean, there's nothing unusual about civilizations evolving, being very open and then closing down. Look what's happening in Europe and the United States of America, where you get bizarre ideas being promulgated all around. Irrationality and closing of minds is a feature of empires and civilizations as they rise and fall. I mean, if you look at some of the so-called science of fascism and the Nazis in the 1900s and 1920s, the most bizarre ideas emerged, totally irrational and crazy, but people believed in it. The rise of superstition and falsehoods is a feature of empires in decline. Nothing unusual about that.
But that didn't happen to India.
Certainly did, yeah.
China.
Kind of core theories that you were looking into in terms of origins, or that you were hoping to?
Me?
Yeah, just
right.
in terms of the ones that you've been looking at. Are there any others which are very much disputed? And
I mean, there is a third part of this talk which I didn't present because this is going to be like 3 hours. Yeah, 3 hours long, and most of the people will doze off. So the other part is astronomy, which developed in which the Greek origins always come in to play. So the claim is that Ptolemy was the father of astronomy, and then we start looking into Ptolemy and what were the works of Ptolemy, the historical Ptolemy, and so on and so forth. And this falls apart. This doesn't happen only in Greek period, Hellenistic period. It happened in the pre-modern European period as well. So Copernicus has been said as the father of modern astronomy. The scientific revolution that he when he proposed the instead of geocentric model, he proposed the heliocentric model. That is, the sun is the center of solar system instead of the Earth being the center of solar system. This model was complete. I mean, if you look at the drawings, you would be surprised how much of a plagiarism is going on. So there was a mathematician, astronomer called what's his name? I forgot. It will come to me in a second. So his work was about 150 years back, much before than Copernicus' work, and his writings were pretty much widely spread. I mean, it was his writings and the writings of astronomers from that particular school, that particular region, were present in Europe as well as in other parts of the world. And these writings were the work of the Arabs, Persian, Central Asian astronomers, scientists, were influenced by Indians as well. So, and their Arabs and so on, they were much more honest compared to the Europeans, and they acknowledged that this is influenced by the Indian system, or Hind, as they call the system of Hind, right? Like the mathematician Khwarizmi, who is called the father of algebra. He called his book Hisab al-Hind, right? So they are not shying away from the origins. They're much more open in accepting that, okay, we are learning from this particular thing and then we are developing it further on. So it's not like Al-Khwarizmi just copied Indian mathematicians. They learned from them, developed further on, and so on. So this is present. This kind of a fabrication, this kind of a suppression of evidence, historical evidence, is present, much more widespread. And the more you look into it, it's much more shocking. I mean, when I started looking into the drawings of Copernicus, it's just astonishing how. I mean, maybe some other time if we discuss this, I can show you the drawings, and this is like identical drawings. How can that come up? And this is called independent discovery, spontaneous discovery. This is again coming back to the Christian doctrine of discovery. Whatever the Christians look at, or European Christians look at, it becomes theirs.
Isn't it also true of medicine as well? You know, in terms of lots of, for example, properties of herbs and things are common knowledge amongst the population and stuff. And I remember even in the 60s and 70s, you know, just usual household herbs and things that you would use, we were told not to use them because they might be dangerous, and they didn't have the alleged properties that we were told we had in our own communities and stuff. And now you read, well, you know, haldi is good for you, or all sorts of things that you now come to transpire to be quite good. But I'm just wondering whether in terms of medicine, has that also hidden knowledge from the East and stuff?
There are definitely plenty of stuff going on there. So you have Ibn Haytham, you have Ibn Sina, who is, I mean, his name is romanized as Avicenna. You have Al-Biruni, you have Ibn Zuhar, and so on. There is I mean, you start looking into it, and it's just a never-ending thing. I mean, not only dozens, there are hundreds of these scientists whose work have been sort of completely suppressed or plagiarized and attributed to the Europeans and so on. So you have.
I find counseling also has, you know, when you read these sort of big texts and things, that they go back to European scholars, you know, in terms of who designed what models of counseling. And yet, if you look at, say, Buddhism and stuff,
yeah,
it's mostly based on that. You know, they're just given different names to these perspectives, really.
Can I just make a point to let's not forget, at the same time there was evolving sciences in the areas you're discussing. At the same time, there's also an independent knowledge being built up in South America and Central America. So the pyramids of the Aztecs and so on and so forth, the Incas, were based upon very advanced trigonometry and geometry.
That's what Abu said.
And very, very, very advanced astronomical readings.
Abu said.
So at the same time as these developments were taking place in Central and South Asia and also Eastern Asia, they had taken place in another part of the world. I think it's a danger that we forget about that.
They didn't notate it. Abu said that.
Yeah. And I just want to make another point. I'm particularly interested in what's called, in Orientalist terms, it's called the Islamic Enlightenment. There's a period in Islam from the 12th century onwards where there's a brilliant philosophizing about the nature of reality, the nature of God, the nature of faith, the nature of reason. which is comparable to and exceeded the European thought on the same subject. And this is a hidden aspect of philosophy, which is unbeknownst to most people in the West, but it reached a brilliance in that period of time and made a great contribution towards philosophizing around the nature of the universe, the nature of being, and the nature of knowledge. And all that is denied, of course, these days. But it's a very important period in world history, exploring reason, logic, and faith.
Why did it disappear?
Yeah, quite. I mean, someone wants to say something. Yeah, you're quite right, Paul. In this, there are major Arab, Central Asian, Persian, Indian philosophers whose work has been diminished and intentionally sort of sidelined, and their contributions are very, very significant contributions. But again, I mean, my aim in discussing this is not exactly to create some sort of ethnocentric discourse or some sort of ethnocentric discussion that, okay, we were great, which I particularly dislike, that there was a golden age of Islamic period or something like that, or there was a golden Brahmin age or Vedic age and so on. That basically is some sort of another delusion. What we need to see is we need to look for the historical evidence of whatever the arguments are, whatever the historical arguments are being presented. So if it is Greeks who did something and there is historical evidence to, then sure, we should accept it. Similarly with the Arabs, with the Indians, with the Chinese, with the Central Americans, with the whatever Australians, native Australians, and so on. We should accept that. This is the first thing. The second thing is, I mean, I think this is quite important because it's going to challenge the European hegemony of knowledge production, and also legitimizing what real knowledge is. For example, what real formal logic is, or what real mathematics is, or what real philosophy is. This is one thing. The other thing which I think we need to, or people need to work on, is what can we take away from these systems of knowledge. So can these systems of knowledge be used in the present day for the challenges of the of present day societies? That is another thing which we need to look into. So, for example, there was you said something, sorry.
No, it was me, the perhaps theory, perhaps logic.
Yeah, I mean, similarly, sociology. So you have Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun was a sociologist. I mean, nowadays, sort of a alternative, decolonial, anti-colonial, post-colonial sociologists ascribe him to be the father of sociology. He proposed, he was according to them, he was the first one who created the science of sociology, or looking into how the society is, looking into the theoretical frameworks, developing theoretical frameworks and finding theoretical principles, how societies operate. And based on these theoretical principles, predicting how the societies are going to operate in future. So not mainly a descriptive sort of endeavor, but also a predictive endeavor. Ibn Khaldun. So Ibn Khaldun's work is important, but then again, Ibn Khaldun in the West and East, Global South, whatever you want to call it, he is taken as some sort of a historical figure, a kind of a medal of pride. If you're a Muslim, you will be okay. So Ibn Khaldun did these great things, but that's about it, right? So we need to move forward in that direction as well.
Has anybody tried to do that? So, you know, what would science or mathematics look like if you used these alternative theories? Or
I know a couple of people who are working on this. So C.K. Raju is one of the guys who has been developing this alternative sort of not only the history of mathematics, but also how to apply the mathematical principles to develop different forms of calculus, different forms of trigonometry, different applications, which can be applied into much more higher sort of technological problems, challenges. So C.K. Raju is doing this. Other people, there are some other people regarding sociologists. There's a Malaysian scholar of Ibn Khaldun. His name is Syed Farid Alatas. Farid Alatas has been looking into it and has been applying these particular Khaldunian sort of frameworks in.
So how do you spell that surname?
Farid, Farid, Alatas, Al-Atas, or Attas, Alatas.
Abu wanted to ask something.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also interested in languages. Like I'm trying to learn a couple of languages, and like knowledge production is produced mostly in English or French or German. You know, especially English, and so like knowledge is produced in the global South, but it's not always brought to light because of the linguistic imperialism of English, the globalization of English, and the popularity of colonial dominated languages like French and German. So there's a lot of stuff coming from, I mean, even the universities in the global South are westernized universities. So, you know, knowledge is, there's stuff out there, you know, and there was stuff before, but it just didn't come to light because of the dominance of colonial languages like English and French and German and Italian.
Okay.
I think I was going to say something in the sense that, I mean, a couple of things. First of all, there's Ibn Khaldun was not just the father of sociology, he was also the one who actually explained or laid down the basis of the theory of how history should be considered. He said history was not just a method of, you know, way of recording and glorifying figures, but it actually based it on material conditions. How, you know, you got to, if history is written, it's got to be proven correct against the material reality. So, you know, that was the foundation of his basis of history being studied as material rather than as glorification or whatever else that was dominant at the time. So he laid the basis of that, and also he laid the basis of how society develops, how society decays, and how empires develop and how empires decay as well. You know, he said how the cities develop and then they become decadent and then get taken over by the peasants or the people from the countryside who are actually the main producers of wealth, because they then claim the wealth back. So I think all that explains it. The question that was raised about how we can look at these, you know, thousands of years of history and human development, on if those things would have developed, what would current science look like? I would say it would not look very different, because the foundations of what we have today was built on the knowledge that the Egyptians, the Indians, and everybody else provided. The problem, the Eurocentric view is actually denying that foundation and saying, you know, they did not, and the reason for doing it is racism, because if they can accept that the people from Africa, the Indian subcontinent, or from the rest of the world also provided knowledge, then they will have to deny their racist theories. And I think that's what was significant about the European civilization and in the era of industrialization, where it had the industrial force to impose its will on the rest of the world. It needed an ideological basis to do it, and that ideological basis was racism. And that racism can only be you know, developed on the understanding that nothing has come of any good from the rest of the world, and we are therefore Europeans, the masters of the world, you know. So everything was based on that.
Okay, shall we wind up this discussion and move on to some current topics?
Current.
Yeah, the farmers.
Should we want to continue with this? Or Saif?
Just-
Sorry, can I just ask one more question related to this discussion?
Yeah.
So, Naeem, yeah, you're probably right. I don't know, but I've got no scientific knowledge in that sense. But I thought that most of because the logic system is mostly binary in the West, then the system that you've outlined, the 4-value system and the 7-value system, is that not, has that been used?
The logic
or?
system is not necessarily binary. In fact, fuzzy logic is very widely used in computer science.
Yeah.
And everything is based on that. Statistics itself is very much is not a binary thing. So it's not binary in that sense.
I mean, we have a brilliant statistician among us, Philippa. I mean, she.
I was looking for the statistician.
No, it's really.
This is a self-denying statistician.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I mean, this is the.
That was fascinating, absolutely fascinating talk. I'm just picturing the greatest scientists of the world talking about Euclidean geometry. The greatest American and European scientists all talking about Euclidean geometry. It really has never struck me the way you've put it today. It's absolutely fascinating. Thanks.
Logistical comment.
No. But in terms of statistics, I mean, and I think Abu's right. Civilizations have been using this stuff. I'm just curious. Am I right in thinking that the most continuous record of writing down mathematical and philosophical development would be in China?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. That's right.
I mean, I think it was a British scholar, Chris Needham. He wrote a massive history of Chinese science and technology, and that easily goes back to 1500 BC.
Yeah.
Records go.
But they've got a continuous record, I would think.
Yeah.
That's the point. But they closed themselves off. Yeah.
Picking up one of the points about statistics, which might, and picking up Naeem's point, is that of course, if you go back to Raj, statistics was used by the British Raj to actually look at taxation and allocation of resources. So it illustrates the point that all knowledge base is a source of power. Knowledge and power are coterminous. And if you recall your Foucault of previous discussions, this is what he was exactly saying, that discourse, knowledge, and power are the same thing. And unsurprisingly, the most powerful define and use knowledge for their own purposes.
Nick wanted to say something.
Yeah. The study of history and knowing where we are come from is one thing, but where we are at the moment is another thing, you know. And I'm just curious as to how Saif would relate his talk of the history with the scientific theory with Pythagoras and also with today's reality. And I think that is a debate. I want to know the connection. How do we connect this thing?
I mean, it's a very complex question. I don't know how to connect. I mean, how would you connect the span of 4,000 years to the present era or present epoch? It's very, very difficult.
Exactly. And I think we need to keep these two focuses in mind. I think it's absolutely brilliant that we need to understand that the history, even Ambedkar and various philosophers have said that we have to understand our history in order to understand our beginning and our future. So this is brilliant that you have done this. But we have to make a connection. And today's reality is that we are facing World Trade Organization's diktats, on the Indian farmers, on the Venezuela's farmers, and everywhere else. And we need to make that connection. So I just want to say thank you very much for your talk, and we need to develop this further and make the interconnection. Thank you.
Okay, it is 8:20. Shall we wind this up? Discussion?
What's on YouTube?
This talk.
Or you want to continue?
And all of us?
What's next week's talk?
Yeah, we
Sorry?
can think about some.
What's next week's talk?
Brian has something in mind. James has something in mind. But I suggest if somebody can prepare a talk on the Capitol Hill attack, it would be nice. And that would be a current topic. Otherwise, Saif can continue with one more if he likes.
No, not really.
Can come back later. Yeah.
Yeah,
Can we get Goggy?
I shall have to wait. You'll have to wait for mine because I've got some health problems at the moment, and I don't feel up to being able to give a lead on something.
Somebody can start volunteer to make a presentation on Capitol Hill. Do you think that is an interesting?
Let's have just a general discussion on it. We don't need to present because we know all the facts. Let's just share our thoughts.
Yeah, I think that might be a good idea.
Okay.
I just heard.
Can
we get some update on the farmers in
18,
India?
18.
Okay. Lake, can you update us on farmers?
Yeah, next week. Yeah, now or next week? Next week I will